Hi, I'd like to share a way to harmonize any situation in your life. It's a way to resolve any conflicts that you're feeling in your life. And I learned this from a wolf, a female wolf. Many years ago, two people, a husband and wife, were guided by God to open a wildlife sanctuary, to provide a safe home, a safe haven for lions, tigers, wolves, cougars, bears, all kinds of wildlife that no longer could live in the wild for one reason or another, and provide a safe home for them, a safe haven. And so Dean and his wife created this place. It's called Out of Africa. It's still here in Arizona. And everything that Dean and his wife do is guided by their connection with God. God speaks to them and suggests things they might do with the animals, with their life, and then they do these things, and with miraculous results. So many years ago, in prayer one day, God spoke to Dean and suggested to him that in these enclosures that they have at this wildlife sanctuary, they have large tracts of land with fences around the outside. In this one enclosure, Dean put the three greatest enemies, the three most natural enemies in Arizona, in the wild in Arizona, to put them all in the same enclosure. So, of course, Dean, was concerned about what would happen if he put these wolves in with cougars and in with bears, because these are natural adversaries, natural enemies. They have their own territory in the wild in Arizona, and they don't overlap territory, and if they do, they fight. And so Dean was hesitant to go ahead, but he knew that everything else that God had suggested to him to do with the animals had always worked out in the end. And so he built this large enclosure, and he put in 3 or 4 gray wolves, 3 or 4 black bears, and 3 or 4 cougars, or wild lions, mountain lions, panthers. And all these natural, so-called natural enemies in this one space. And for many days, they went through all their defensive postures, and they growled and hissed at each other. And then, but they didn't fight. And eventually, one day, the oldest female wolf from the wolf pack walked over to the cougars, the mountain lions, alone. She walked over in front of the cougars, and as they were howling and growling at her, she laid down on her back in that total submissive position. The way dogs lie down when they want us to rub their bellies. And she just laid down, totally defenseless, totally trusting, totally open, right in front of these cougars. And at first, the cougars did not know what to do. They were bewildered and bedazzled. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know how to react. And for a long time, they didn't react at all. And eventually, one of the cougars went up and started touching the female wolf. And eventually they started playing with their paws. And then eventually the female wolf ended up playing with all the cougars, rolling and wrestling the way little cubs play, little kids play, little puppies play. And then at that point, the other wolves came over, and all the wolves and all the cougars were playing like little puppies. And so then the female wolf, a little while later, she went over to these big black bears, another one of their so-called natural enemies in the wild. And again, she laid down on her back, totally vulnerable, open, defenseless, in front of this huge black bear. And again, the black bears didn't know what to do at first, didn't react. And then eventually one of the bears came over and started to nudge her and touch her and play with her. And the female wolf started to play with that bear, and eventually all the bears and all the wolves started playing together. And then within a few days, all three animals, all three packs, were playing like puppies that were born together into the same group, the same brood. And they play and they swim and they wrestle together and live in this real harmony. What's fun is that at the time you could go out of Africa to this wildlife sanctuary and you could see this happen every day. You could go and just sit. They had this enclosure, and you could watch these so-called natural enemies come up and greet each other, play, touch, and wrestle. And it was really quite a sight to behold. What I found equally as fascinating was to watch the audience, because in the audience were a lot of hunters. Arizona is a big hunting state, and you could tell these guys knew the way cougars and bears and wolves interacted with each other out in the wild when they were out in the forest hunting. They knew that these animals stayed away from each other, they fought over territory, and they were natural enemies in their experience out in the wild. And here they were watching them playing, living harmoniously together. And it was fun to watch the expression. First there was an expression on these hunters of disbelief. They were kind of frozen and paralyzed. And then after a while, they started to relax a little and notice little things. And after a while, they started to, some of these hunters actually started to shake. Some of them started shaking their heads at first. Sometimes their body would shake. And some of them actually even cried. They try to hide it. They try to hide that they were crying. But some of these great big burly outdoorsmen would actually start to weep. And I knew, I'd watched them for many minutes, and I could see that it was tears of joy. It was tears of what I call recognition, realizing they were seeing something miraculous, something wondrous, something new and different, and something very beautiful. So it was quite fascinating to watch both these three so-called natural enemies play together, as well as watching the reaction of the audience. So, what was the female wolf wanting to show us? What was God or Spirit wanting to tell us through this experience, through this phenomenon? Why did God tell Dean to put these natural enemies together? And as I sat with that for many years, playing it back, and I'd go back up and visit, and I'd see it again, and I'd have these wonderful waves of recognition and joy and just relief and release, and just watching this scene play out that made no sense in the surface, but it was real, it was happening. It was very mind expanding to watch these animals together, these seemingly opposites and these seeming enemies. And then I started to get an idea of what Spirit was trying to share. And it reminded me of the Bible. When they talk in the Bible, they talk about that at this time that we're in right now, in the future, in the Bible, there would be a time when the lamb would lie with the lion. And that would be a time of great change and transformation, when the lamb lies with the lion. And I felt that that's what was happening here. Here were these enemies lying together, playing together, being together, in harmony, at peace. And it also reminded me of the 23rd Psalm, where it says, and the Lord prepareth a table before mine enemies. Now in those days, if you prepared a table with your enemies, it meant you were going to break bread with your enemies. You were going to sit down and eat with your enemies. And that symbolized, that meant in that culture, that you were making friends with your enemies, that you were no longer enemies. You were finding a common bond. You were coming together. And so it reminded me of that phrase, that the Lord prepareth a table before mine enemies. And that's what I feel Spirit was showing us through this natural phenomenon. And finally, it reminded me also of a phrase that Jesus used in the Essene Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Thomas. Jesus says, when you make the two one, you enter the kingdom of heaven. When you make the two one, you enter the kingdom of heaven. When you make the two one. And I had wondered about that phrase for years. And then I realized, oh, we have these opposites. We have these enemies, these beings that are conflicting, separate. And they're coming together as one group, as one harmonious family. And I realized that phrase, making the two one, is then when you can see life, when you can see the harmony between things, the oneness, the connection, the union, when you can see the common thread of energy, aliveness, love, flow, when you can see cooperation and communion between opposites. And I realized that's why it was so powerful for us humans to sit in the audience and to witness and see these seeming opposites, enemies, come together and become friends. It's a very, very powerful experience. And what I realized is that when you can allow opposites to come together in the same space, when you can allow for whatever is to be just what it is, that allows whatever's going on, whatever game or dance of life, it allows that to fully express, if you allow it, if you make space for it, if you acknowledge it. And I had a personal experience that helped me to see this. About the same time that I was experiencing the wolves and the cougars and the bears lying together, playing together, coming together as one, I was doing a workshop down in Phoenix, and I was very troubled one morning driving to the workshop because I was really opening spiritually, and I realized, and I had this idea in my head, this concept, this belief in my head, that there was an opposition, a conflict between becoming one with God, one with your spiritual self, one with your higher self, and having a personal, human, romantic relationship with another person, another human. And these two felt in conflict to me. And I had this belief that I could only have one or the other, that I had to choose. And if I chose one, I would lose the other. And as I was developing more spiritually, getting closer to Spirit, I was very concerned that I would lose my ability, that I would never have the kind of loving human relationship with another person that I'd always wanted. And I was praying on the way, driving on the road, on the way. It's funny, the town I was going to is called Carefree, Arizona. So I was driving to Carefree and asking God to help me that day at the workshop. Could you help me to somehow find peace or choose between one or the other? Just somehow help me with this situation. And at one point, I felt this wonderful energy come over me, and I actually saw right there over the highway, I saw over here was me and my relationship with Spirit or God, and over here was my relationship with another person. And I was holding these as being, separate, not able to be mixed. And I realized at that point that they started to move together. And as they were moving together, in my vision, I was having a vision over the highway as I was driving, as these two relationships started to occupy the same space, the same bubble of consciousness in front of me. At first I fought it. At first I said, no, that's impossible. One will wipe out the other. One will overpower the other. I'll lose one in the other. And then I realized that they were hanging there, floating. These two types of relationships in the same space, in the same time and space. And they were not mutually exclusive. And I saw that this was the answer to my prayer. That Spirit God was telling me, you can have both. They can both exist in the world of spirit, in the world of energy, in the world of allowing harmony, and in the real world, in your life. And I realized at that point I could have both. They were not mutually exclusive. And then I began to understand what the female wolf was showing us, and these wild animals were showing us, and coming together of the opposites. That when you allow whatever the predicament is, whatever the paradox is, whatever the conflict is, and just allow it to be just what it is, and accept it, allow it, acknowledge it, then it can complete itself as an expression of separation, conflict, opposites, contrast, whatever. Allow it to fully express by acknowledging it, allowing it to be just what it is. And what happens is when it fully expresses, it completes itself. That creation completes itself. And then naturally, on its own, it shifts into something new and different. Most often harmony, oneness, union of spirit, of energy. And so right now, if you'd like, it'd be fun, we can play with this personally. So if you would, allow yourself to intuitively feel or intuit some situation in your life that feels conflicted. Some situation that feels like you can't have your cake and eat it too. Some two people that seem inharmonious, or some two aspects of your life, spirituality and money, or spirituality and sex, or spirituality and love and romance, or two activities that don't seem to mix, or two aspects of your life and someone else's life, or something you love and something else loves that don't seem to mix, that don't seem to be compatible. Just two things, or even you can go deeper than that and choose the polarity, the duality that we have between health and sickness, or abundance and poverty, or life and death. And just allow these opposites, allow them all to be just the way they are. Allow yourself to hold them just the way you're holding them now. And allow yourself to accept that. One trick I do with myself is I say, Keith, can you allow this to be the way it is? However uncomfortable it is, but could you allow this to be just as it is? Since it's that way anyway. Since it's already that way, and you can see and feel, and that's what's upsetting you, is that it is that way, could you simply acknowledge that it is that way as a starting point? So I asked myself, as a starting point, could I allow or acknowledge things to be just as they are? That I'm holding things as opposite, opposing, conflicting. Could I just acknowledge that, allow that? And then when you do that, things begin to shift and move and change. Could I say yes to the situation just as it is? And then, could I allow the field of consciousness that I have around this one aspect, item, one of the conflicting elements, could I allow my field of consciousness, beliefs and feelings, could I allow the field of consciousness around this particular aspect of my life to interact differently with the field of consciousness around this other aspect of my life? Could I allow there to be a different interaction between the two morphic fields, between the two fields of energy? Could I allow my consciousness and beliefs around one subject to interact differently? Could I allow that? And if I did, what would happen? And these are open-ended questions, not for you to figure out right now or to answer yourself, but as prayers, as requests, as an open-ended question to the universe, to pose these questions and then let go and allow whatever happens to happen. And over the next few days or weeks, an answer will come. New experiences will come. If you pay attention, messages, guides, you'll be guided by signs and synchronicities to have a new experience of these two parts of your life that before were separate, opposing, contrasting, troublesome. And you'll be guided to have a new experience of this aspect of your life, of this situation. So if you knew how you could shift this conflict. If I knew how I could shift this conflict, what would I do? And let it go. And just allow yourself to be guided. If I could allow these two aspects of my life to be in conflict, to be disharmonious, to be opposing, if I could allow that, how would I do that? And then on the reverse, if I could allow these two concepts to occupy the same space, if I could allow these two seemingly opposing forces to occupy the same space, what would happen then? What would my life be like? If I could allow my enemies to become my friends, what would my life be like? If I could bring together every aspect of my life that I felt was incompatible with other parts of my life, other beliefs, other experiences, if I could bring them all together in the same space of grace, of divine wisdom, if I could bring them all together in the same space, what would happen then? Just let go and allow whatever happens to happen. Thank you.